support for socialism in America continues to grow. But why? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Socialism continues to grow in popularity, especially among America's youth. And that can't all be attributed to poor public schooling. It has to be blamed on today's batch of politicians touting the so-called benefits of socialism. Messages that with alarming frequency resonate with the youth. Free college, free this, free that. It used to be in America, taking things for free carried a certain stigma, as if to say, I don't need you to help me. I can do it myself. Well, now that's been flipped. And suddenly, taking things for free is something to be applauded. Before I get into that, I want to give a quick mention that if you enjoy listening to Bold and Blunt, first off, thank you. Thank you for being a regular listener. I appreciate that. But I also wanted to let you know you can get Bold and Blunt not just at Washington Times by subscribing to my 3 times a week newsletter that contains all my commentaries I write at the Washington Times. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday it comes out right to your email box. And in it, you can also get my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcasts that come out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So not only can you get those delivered straight to your email box by subscribing on the WashingtonTimes.com webpage, but you can also find Bold and Blunt at edify.app/podcasts. It is the platform online to find all your favorite faith-based podcasts. And honestly, who doesn't need a little bit of faith today to deal with things like this?
It is sad. It is a sad day in which a member who leads a political party in the United States of America cannot bring themselves to say that issuing a depiction of murdering a member of Congress is wrong, and instead decides to venture off into a tangent about gas prices and inflation. What is so hard? What is so hard about saying that this is wrong?
What is it with Democrats? That was, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the card-carrying socialist, the open socialist on Capitol Hill, railing against Congressman Paul Gosar, Republican of Arizona, for a retweet that he made in which she was depicted as a victim of violence. Well, that's well and good. That's good and well. And this isn't about whether or not Congressman Paul Gosar's retweet was proper or improper. The House apparently deemed it improper because they ultimately censored him, after which he defiantly retweeted it again. Anyhow, but it is to point to, first off, Democrat, which is another way these days of saying socialist, Democrat socialist hypocrisy. Remember this?
People love you and you win. And when your son looks at you and says, Mama, look, you won, bullies don't win. And I say, baby, they don't. Because we're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the motherfucker.
Oh. Yeah, good cheers and jeers all around for Rashida Tlaib back when she won her congressional race in 2019. And really, the Democrats, their water carriers in the press, had very little to say about her choice of language for a sitting president of the United States. And yet Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez drumming up the support system once again with her dramatic theatrics on Capitol Hill. But what is it about the left that they have to use their voices to create some sort of drama? Why can't they just speak? Why can't, for instance, Joe Biden? Why when President Joe Biden speaks, why does he always have to drop his voice to a dramatic whisper? Why does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have to drop her voice?
This is not about me. This is not about Representative Gosar. But this is about what we are willing to accept. Not just the Republican leader, but I have seen other members of this party advance the argument, including Representative Gosar himself, the illusion that this was just a joke.
All right, that's enough of her. She's had her 2 minutes on stage. You know, it reminds of Greta Thunberg, the way Greta Thunberg goes overseas and scolds the entire world for environmentalism. She does the same sort of drama.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you?
How dare you? How dare you? Joe Biden does the same sort of drama.
Victories for all of us. Because I might add, I notice when you all do that, everybody benefits. Whether they belong to a union or not.
Everybody benefits. I see dead people. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the same sort of drama. And what's interesting to me is that when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez gets on her high horse, she doesn't just get on her high horse and ride it down some sort of reasonable path, down some sort of rational road. She gets on her high horse and she flies it through the skies like she's riding a fantasy unicorn. Listen to this, her accounting of what she felt and what she thought during that fateful January 6th day on Capitol Hill, that the Democrats are squeezing for all the political capital that it's worth. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on CNN.
Reasons why that impact was so doubled that day is because of the misogyny and the racism that is so deeply rooted and animated that attack on the Capitol. White supremacy and patriarchy are very linked.
See, it's not just a few bad actors on Capitol Hill going violent. It has to be an entire movement based in white supremacy and misogyny and sexism.
There's a lot of sexualizing of that violence. And I didn't think that I was just going to be killed. I thought other things were going to happen to me as well.
So what sounds like what you're telling me right now is that you didn't only think that you were going to die, you thought you were going to be raped.
Yeah. I thought I was.
Oh, victim.
And that you now understand, having thought about it, is because of your experience.
Yeah, I think so. Survivors have a very strong set of skills. And the skills that are required as a survivor, the tools that you build for resilience, they come back in right away.
Go Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Not only was she the ultimate victim on January 6th, cowering in her office in fear of being beaten or killed or raped, but also now she is the ultimate survivor. She is the ultimate survivor of the misogyny, of the violence, of the white supremacy, of the sexualization, as she put it, of the violence that occurred on January 6th. Look, if she really believed all that, then she would be a staunch defender of the Second Amendment. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez knows she's full of you-know-what, and she knows that she's just using this incident, as well as the Gosar incident, as well as whatever else can crop up during her course in Congress, for exploitative purposes, to push forward a far-left agenda that continues the division in America of Americans that the far left needs in order to achieve their ultimate far left designs. The Democrats can't win on principle. They have to rely on deception. They have to rely on deception and distraction and division in order to score any political points at all. And so when you get someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is an open socialist, who wants this country to be socialist, who basically hates everything that this country stands for and was founded upon, and wants to change the foundations and structure of this nation to mirror that of communist-style countries, when you get someone like that in political office, and you give them free rein and plenty of media star power, they can do a lot of damage. So when you look at polls like the recent one put out by Axios Momentive, that's Axios/Momentive, which surveyed 2,309 people in the United States in June and found that 41% of all adults participating in the poll said they viewed socialism positively, and that's up from 39% in 2019. It's cause for alarm, but it's also due to politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being given free rein and free, plentiful opportunities to push forward her socialist views as if there's some good for this country, as if there's some benefit. She says things without thinking things through, and she says things in complete ignorance of what makes this country great in the first place. And let me tell you what that thing is that makes this country great in the first place, and I can say it in just a short phrase. God-given rights. This country was founded on the notion of rights coming from God, not government. And government is only there to protect and preserve the rights that citizens already have at birth from God. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez either don't get that or outright dismiss that. Or worse, and this is where she comes into the picture, are outright hostile to that fact and attack it. And the reason for the hostility is because people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez want to hold all the keys of control. They want to hold all the power. They want to dictate to everybody else how to live their lives. Because then they can pat themselves on the back and pretend like they're doing some larger good. And they can take the moral high road and claim that they're doing some moral virtuous good. When really, all they're doing is destroying the foundations of this nation. There's a reason that the Democrats in particular try to create race divisions, maintain race divisions, and expand race divisions. Let me read this from The Independent about this poll. According to the poll's findings, much of the rise in favor for socialism in America appeared to be driven by Black Americans and women, I'm quoting from The Independent, with socialism having positive connotations for 60% of Black Americans and 45% of American women. So it's incumbent on the left to drum up race divisions and drum up the idea of misogyny. Listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speak. Almost any time she speaks, she finds a way to draw back the topic at hand, the matter being discussed, to race or gender. It's about white supremacy. It's about misogyny. It's about racism. You get people like that in politics combined with the rising generations being force-fed the idea of capitalism as an inherently racist system. And what you have is a disaster for liberty-loving Americans waiting to happen. According to the poll's findings, The Independent went on, young adults' perception of capitalism have played a major role in driving the decline, with 18 to 34-year-olds almost evenly split between those who see capitalism in a positive light and those who view it negatively at 49% and 46% respectively. You've got rising generation embracing socialism over capitalism. You've got Black America embracing socialism over capitalism. You've got American women embracing socialism over capitalism. Where does that leave America? Let's not forget, against this backdrop, we've got the feckless Joe Biden in the White House, who is allowing the far left forces working busily behind scenes in the White House on all of America's foreign and domestic policies. And I have a guest today who still maintains optimism for the future of America, which is a good thing. Because really, after listening to all this, after listening to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez whine, don't we all need a good dose of optimism? His name is Newt Gingrich. He was the former Speaker of the House, of course. And he has a new book out, Beyond Biden, Rebuilding the America We Love. And rebuilding is the right word here, because after 4 years of Joe Biden, we're going to have a lot of rebuilding to do. His book comes at a good time, Beyond Biden. So Newt Gingrich, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Well, I'm delighted to do it.
Great. So let me just start with a general open-ended question. Can America survive Joe Biden?
Oh, I think we will survive Joe Biden. I wrote a book called Beyond Biden. I worry that we may not be able to survive our inability to have a serious conversation. I think the challenge of China, the challenge of technological change, the number of reforms and modernizations we need may literally be beyond our ability to have a conversation that makes sense, and that worries me a great deal. Biden is a passing moment. In fact, I deliberately did not write an anti-Biden book because I thought he would destroy himself. I didn't think he needed any pushing. And Kamala's even worse. There's this URL that has 10 hours of Kamala laughing. I think it sort of does everything you need to know.
Well, if we can't have a conversation with our political opponents or people with differing opinions, then where do you draw your optimism on America's surviving then?
That the American people, in fact, have historically always been better than their elites. That we've had this almost, Washington, General Washington said that anybody who thought we had won the Revolutionary War without the divine intervention of Providence did not understand what had happened, and that as the person who led the army, he was quite convinced that there were key moments in the war that could only have occurred because of some kind of intervention. Bismarck said that God favors fools, drunks, in the United States of America. And Churchill once said that Americans ultimately do the right thing, but they try everything else first. And I guess I'm in that tradition. I think 320 million or 330 million Americans who want to pursue happiness, who want a better future for their children, even if they currently don't think they know how to get there. I mean, the current sense of frustration can lead you to depression and doing nothing, or it can lead you to breaking out. I look at a minor example. Elon Musk, a Canadian-descended, South African-born American entrepreneur, next year will probably, through SpaceX, launch more total weight into space than the Chinese government. That is an astonishing achievement that nobody planned on. It just happened. And while I get irritated at some of their behaviors, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, Apple, these things just happened. They weren't central government planning. They weren't, some commissar making a decision.
Right.
And I think all around us, I just did a great podcast with Jacques, who owns Liberties Chez Francois. and he was talking about all the innovations they made to survive COVID. And that's happening everywhere in the country. Millions of individual entrepreneurs or reporters or blog podcasters or you name it, all churning and trying to find things. And I think eventually we'll break through. My greatest fear is that we will lose to China in the interim, in which case we will see the end of freedom as we've known it for the last couple hundred years.
Yeah,
that doesn't happen. I have no doubt that 30 or 40 years from now we will have broken out again and be the leading. At that point, we'll be the leading nation in the solar system, not just on the planet.
Let's talk about China for a minute, because in your book, Beyond Biden, Rebuilding the America We Love, you do dedicate some pages to discussing China. And you just said if China doesn't become the breakout nation, then America will definitely return to the America we love. But you look around what's happening now under this present administration, China is hurtling toward global dominance. So what do you see as stopping it?
Well, Claire Christensen and I wrote a book 2 or 3 years ago called Trump versus China. And researching that book was very sobering for me. I'd been looking at China since 1960. And I'd read a lot of Mao and Sun Tzu and all that stuff. And had visited China a number of times. And I realized when I went back and reviewed everything that I had made a profound mistake, which most of the American elites had made. And that was when Deng Xiaoping made what was called the Southern Tour and gave the great speeches in which he said that they had to go to a market economy. And he famously said he doesn't care whether it's a black cat or a white cat. He cares if it catches mice, saying he didn't care if it was capitalist or communist. He wanted to be productive.
Right.
I thought, as most of us did, that was the beginning of opening up and moving towards not just a market economy, but a more open society. Well, when I went back and spent a good bit of time for over a year doing research, I came to realize, to my chagrin, that Deng Xiaoping was one of the 23 founders of the Chinese Communist Party right after World War I. He spent a year in Moscow at Lenin University. He was a devoted Stalinist. And what he was saying was, we have to produce enough prosperity to sustain the dictatorship, not to change it. And he's one of the leading advocates at Tiananmen Square of killing the protesters. And I began to realize that Xi Jinping is in the Mao tradition, and in fact recently has been given power that only Deng Xiaoping and Mao ever had, and he is dedicated to the Chinese domination of the planet. And our business leaders can't see that because they're making too much money and they're too afraid. But the truth is, this is a very ruthless, intense dictatorship, deeply committed to centralized power, and frankly, our Pentagon is so obsolete. This is not a function of money. These are bureaucracies that are industrial era, obsolete bureaucracies. Our intelligence community is similarly obsolete. Our State Department is hopelessly out of touch with reality. And the combination of all that means that we're in a period which could be extraordinarily dangerous. And my only point is, if we get through this period, which is more than Biden, it's a huge the number one crisis is education, even more than the Pentagon. You can't have 5 schools in Baltimore that don't graduate a single student capable of passing a state exam and think you're going to compete with China. You're ruining the lives of these kids, and you're ruining their capacity to be part of a successful country. I do think that we ought to have a big sense of urgency, and we ought to have a national debate about what is it going to take to make America a modern country, which we currently are not. We're an increasingly obsolete, bureaucratic, industrial-era society.
Everything you just described about the perils that America is facing from China is just hitting the nail on the head. And I think most Americans, even without your historical perspective, inherently feel something like that coming. But the problem is that this administration not only doesn't see the threat, but it's almost as if this administration is throwing in with the idea that China is inevitable and they want to get on board and work with China so they can somehow come out on top, or at least on equal playing field with China. Am I wrong in perceiving that?
No, but that's the view of most American billionaires. That's the view of the National Basketball Association.
Yes.
That's the view of the president of Nike. I mean, you have a large block of people who for profit, will drop patriotism in a heartbeat, and will do things that are, really cool for their company or really cool for their bank account, but are crippling for America. You have huge institutions like Yale and University of Pennsylvania that are basically fellow travelers with the Chinese, that refuse to turn over information, that fight to keep secrets about how close they're related to China. We will look back on this period and realize someday, assuming that we're still free, that we went through a harrowing period that's much worse than the Soviet penetration of the U.S. after World War II, and much worse than the Nazi penetration in the 1930s, and that our own elites were actively involved in selling out the United States for their own profit.
Yep. You know what? You just put, in just a few words, you nailed everything that's taking place in America that is the biggest danger of our days. So let me ask you this. Let me ask people listening to you right now, describe what's taking place in America and the China threat and want to fight back. How can you, in the face of such a giant adversary?
Well, first of all, you have to wipe out a generation of politicians. You just say to them, if you're not prepared to protect America and you're not prepared to put patriotism at a profit, I'm going to beat you. I mean, I thought the most encouraging moment, I just did a newsletter on the tsunami that is coming that will basically annihilate the Democratic Party. But this is not Republican or Democrat. I think Republicans also have too many people who are confused. But the most encouraging single moment to me recently was Ed Doerr Jr. winning the state Senate seat against the president of the state Senate, who had gotten almost 59% 4 years ago.
Yep.
Because Ed Doerr Jr. is an independent trucker who was turned down for a concealed carry permit and got pissed off and decided to run. He spent $2,300. 4 years ago, it was the most expensive legislative race in the country because the teachers union tried to beat the state Senate president, and they spent between them $17 million. And here comes Doerr, spends $2,300, most of it at Dunkin' Donuts on coffee and donuts for his volunteers, the rest of it on printing paper handouts. He decisively beats the state Senate president because people walked in and said, not him. And I think you're going to see that happening all over the country. And one of the great challenges for our intellectuals, and it's something that Claire Christensen and I are working on now, is we need a checklist of what to do right in order to be able to defeat the Chinese offensive. And I think it's going to be a big checklist, and I think it's going to be a serious problem. And then we need to say to every American citizen, if your member of the House and Senate isn't prepared to do this, fire them. And we need to say in 2016, when Biden, I'm convinced, will not run for re-election, whoever is running in the Democratic or Republican Party, if they, so you almost need a contract for patriotism that says, I am prepared to do these things to make sure that America survives the Chinese effort. And again, I don't blame the Chinese. They're just being Chinese.
Right.
But if you live next to a lion, it is useful not to go get in the cage and play with them.
That's a creative way of putting that. I know our time is tight, so let me just finish with this question. And I'm not sure if you address this in Beyond Biden, Rebuilding the America We Love, your latest book, but how worried are you about the coronavirus being exploited for use to enable the Chinese to take over America, culturally speaking, and finally politically and economically speaking? How worried are you about the coronavirus being used by the Democrat Party and the left to accomplish this?
Yeah, well, I would draw a distinction. I worry a lot about governments everywhere who are using this as an excuse to dramatically expand the power of government and to undermine and weaken the free, independent spirit of citizens. I think in that sense, everywhere on the planet, it's a problem, whether it's Italy or Great Britain or India or you name it. But I can tell you, I have a good friend who just visited China. He spent 10 days in a hotel room where they visited 3 times a day to check his temperature, and 3 times a day brought him food, and he could not leave the hotel room for 10 days. I think the Chinese are at least as afraid of the virus as we are. I used to be on the board of advisors for the Journal of Biological Warfare.
And I think that this thing is out of control and is not a deliberate effort by the Chinese, but it has strengthened all the elements of big government authority all over the planet in their effort to control citizens. And in that sense, it's extraordinarily dangerous. It's the effort to control citizens that's dangerous, much more dangerous than the virus itself.
Yeah, a lot of dangers out there for patriotic American citizens. So more need to read your book, Beyond Biden, Rebuilding the America We Love. Newt Gingrich, I'm sure it's another bestseller. Thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt.
Well, great to be with you.
If only the Joe Biden administration would pick up a copy of this book and check it out. Maybe America would be a little safer place to live in the coming days, weeks, months, and sadly, years. Don't forget, you can listen to Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com. Or, of course, on the platform for faith-based podcasts, Edify, edify.app/podcasts. You can find Bold and Blunt there. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.